Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. Today's video features special guests, Grimtail Brothers. I will leave a link to their channel in the description box below. Be sure to check them out and support them. Subscribe and like their videos. You know what to do. Sit back, relax, stay sinful. Story number 1. So I live in Scotland, and had previously sent in a story about hearing 7 loud footsteps coming up my stairs, suddenly stopping. I'm convinced that it was a supernatural being known as a jinn, and this story might involve the same thing, but it could also be my imagination since I was a kid. This may not seem scary to others, and not much really happens to be honest, but it definitely scared me as a kid, and I never forgot about it. Anyway, this happened back in the 90s, so my memory is fuzzy, but here we go. I was in bed trying to sleep because school was the next day, or at least I was supposed to be trying to sleep. I was actually waiting on my parents to fall asleep so I could sneak into the living room and watch TV, but it rarely ever worked out that way. I think it was between 9 and 11 p.m. I was lying down, feeling pissed off that my parents were still awake. When I looked forward towards my feet, I saw something. A head, lying at the foot of my bed. I mean, it was actually on my bed facing me. I think it had shoulder-length stringy hair because it was dark. I couldn't make out much else, except for its mouth and jaw moving up and down. I was pretty much frozen at this point, but it suddenly got a little worse. The head began moving closer to me, but not in the way you might think. The best way I can describe it is that it was disappearing and reappearing, left to right while staying somewhat in the center of my bed. With each reappearance, it would get closer and closer to me. What makes it even weirder is that I heard no sound coming from it. It's completely silent, and I can't understand how that could be, as I can see its mouth opening and closing with force. After its 3rd or 4th reappearance, I screamed. This caused my parents and older sibling to rush in to see what was going on. Once they put the light on, however, the thing was gone. I tell them what happened, but they refused to believe it, telling me that it was my imagination, but I was dead certain it was real. This ended with my older sibling telling me that it was actually them just playing a prank, and that it was their head that I saw, just to shut me up. Now, I was a dumbass kid, so I believed it. I mean, they were in their own room, so of course it wasn't them. There was obviously no way they could fake it like that. This was over a decade ago, when I was in my early 20s, but I used to party in a nearby small town in Oklahoma, would come home late in the middle of the night, usually without incident. One night I was coming home down the northbound side of the interstate around 4 a.m., and I got off the exit. There was a car that had pulled over on the off-ramp, so trying to be kind, I stopped to see if they needed a jump. I had jumper cables in my car. I then rolled down the passenger window. A scruffy-looking man approached while a lankier man waited by the car. Me. Are you okay? Do you need a jump? Him. We're fine. We were heading to Texas and our car broke down. We need money to get it to a repair shop. Do you have any cash you'd be willing to help us with? Me. I actually don't carry cash, sorry. Him. In a creepy tone. Oh, come on now, a pretty little thing like you. Surely you have some cash on you. He then smiled the creepiest, most mischievous grin I'd ever seen. Me. Sorry, I just don't, but I have to go. Sorry and good luck. As soon as he stepped back from my car, I sped away. I'm sure it could have been innocent, but he was on the northbound off-ramp facing north. Texas was south in the complete opposite direction. The whole thing just gave me a bad vibe and made me sick to my stomach. This happened around 2 years ago. When I was in my second year of college, I take a bus every day for about a half an hour to get to school. One day I was at the bus stop waiting for the bus, as there were many other people, and smoking a cigarette. I noticed a guy staring at me from across the bus stop. At that time I thought nothing of it. He probably was just staring blankly. The bus came and people started entering. I still had a few minutes before the bus left, so I kept smoking my cigarette. Everyone entered the bus, leaving me and the guy alone outside. He was still staring at me and didn't go inside. I just thought he wasn't taking that bus. When I'm about to go inside, the man follows me quickly, entering just behind. So that's creepy, right? But still, it probably has a reasonable explanation. I sat in an empty seat on the left side of the bus, on the window side. He sits behind me. As the bus starts to go, I put my earphones and take off my jacket. About 5 minutes into the ride, I start feeling uncomfortable, like something behind my back isn't letting me sit comfortably. I think it must be the jacket behind my back. I put my hand on the left side of my stomach to pull the jacket from behind me. What I felt wasn't a jacket, it was a hand. The man behind me had put his hand in my stomach and was moving it around. As I grab his hand, he pulls back in an instant. I take my earphones out and just sit there in absolute horror. I know I should have said something to the bus driver, but I didn't have the gut. I think to myself that he was caught and isn't going to try anything else. I put my earphones back and just try to relax for the rest of the trip. A few minutes later, I felt a hand touching my arm and stroking it. This time I was really scared. I still didn't want to make a scene, so I just did the first thing that came to mind. I crushed his hand as hard as I could with my elbow against the window. Even with my earphones blasting music, I heard the man scream under his breath. I switched seats to avoid any further interaction, and nothing more happened during that trip. This is a short story, but it still made me very nervous. I'm 17 and always been paranoid about being alone. I'm not sure why, but I always feel like I'm going to be snatched up and kidnapped. Anyways, I had gotten home from my boyfriend's house when I realized I had forgot to grab milk from my mom on the way home. I got back in my car and drove to Walmart, just 6 miles down the road. Of course, nothing seemed abnormal about the lack of business at 9 o'clock. That is until a heavy-set tall man, who looked like he was in his late 40s, spotted me, started to follow me through the aisles. At first, I thought he just needed something from the coolers like I did. As I grabbed the gallon of milk, he paused at a random section as I passed. After 2 minutes of me walking towards the self-checkout, I spotted him in the reflection of a mirror by the clothing section. He was still following. He had nothing in his hands, which seemed off to me. I bought the milk and started to head to my car. I took a quick glance behind me and still saw him following me. Panic started to set in, so I fast walked to my car. Once I reached for my door handle and got in, he stopped about 10 or 15 feet away, then walked to the left side of the parking lot, not sure of his intentions, but still, let's not meet again. When I was 12, my family was at dinner in one of their friends' homes. I didn't come with them because I was sick and didn't want to bother people with my problems. It was around 10 p.m., and I was reading a comic book in my bedroom upstairs when I heard my parents' bedroom window open. I thought it was a wind until I heard it close. I went to my parents' bedroom thinking my parents were back home and realized nobody was here and the window was locked. I wasn't realizing something was going on at this moment and verified all windows upstairs. They were all locked. I went downstairs and did the same thing, double-checking all the windows. It was only at this moment that I was scared and directly went to the kitchen to bring a knife, and then I decided to hide in a room ready to defend myself. I was in the room for 15 minutes when I heard some noises upstairs sounded like someone was walking. I was paralyzed by the fear. I was thinking of a way to leave the house as soon as possible. I couldn't open the window in the room I was in without making a sound, so I thought about running as fast as possible from the room to the entry door. I finally abandoned this idea in case somebody waited for the man in the front of the house. I looked out the door of the room that I was in to see if there was somebody in the kitchen, and then I saw them. They wore masks with holes for eyes and mouths and were in all black. Then I heard the sound of a car's engine in the garden. As the two men left, one of the men smiled at me before running away from the back door. I immediately left my hiding place and ran to the back door to lock it. When my parents got home, I told them what I had seen, and they didn't believe me at all. So to the men in my house, let's not meet again.
Long-time lurker here, and I always contemplated telling my story. I feel like I am finally ready to revisit that time in my life. Maybe that is because my mother finally forgave herself. I was 10 years old, just started 5th grade. I made a new friend in school, Janie. My parents allowed me to go for a sleepover at her house. They met her mom once. My mom and dad were pretty laid back because I was their first kid. My sisters were 9 to 13 years older than me. So my mom dropped me off, said hello to Janie's mom, and left. Me and Janie started playing karaoke when her mom decided she was going to leave. She said goodbye to us, gave us kisses on the cheek, and I remember thinking she smelled like black licorice. Me and Janie were left to do whatever we wanted for the next 5 hours. Janie's older sister came home around 1 a.m. and told us that we should go to bed because we were falling asleep on the couch. So we went into Janie's room and laid in her bed. Later that night, I can't be sure what time because it was pitch dark, Janie's mom came home. I woke up to a pounding sound on Janie's bedroom door. I started yelling in fear when I felt a hand over my mouth. It was Janie telling me to be quiet and pretend to be asleep. But at the moment, it was too late. Her mom had kicked the door open, stormed over to the bed and grabbed Janie's face. She began screaming at Janie because we accidentally left the TV on. I was trying to hide under the covers, but she saw me. She began slamming her fist on the bed around me and screamed,
"You think you are better than me?"
over and over. I was sobbing, and all I could think about was going home. I was so scared, and I begged her mom to let me call my parents because I felt sick. Her mom grabbed my chin, looked me in the eyes and said,
"I know what you're doing, little girl, and you aren't going anywhere until I say you can."
She stormed out of the room, slamming the half-broken bedroom door behind her. Janie said nothing, and neither did I. Needless to say, I did not sleep that night. In the morning when I went to call my mom, Janie's mom was on the phone. She wouldn't let me use it, even though I asked multiple times. Finally, she was going to take a shower and I heard her pass the phone off to Janie's sister and say,
"Don't let that little bitch use my phone. If you do, I ain't buying you cigarettes anymore."
I was a sheltered kid at the time, but when I overheard that, I knew I had to get out of there. I approached Janie's sister and she basically threw the phone at me. She was ready to give it to me before I even asked for it. With a look of fear in her eyes, she said, "My mom is calling her guy, so you need to call your home now." And so I did. She saved my life, and I still believe that to this day. Was her guy someone who was going to get rid of me? Oh, I shudder at the thought. The rest of the story isn't very exciting. My mom picked me up. I acted like nothing was wrong. 2 days later, it was Parents' Day in school. Janie was in my class, which meant her mom was there. Her mom approached me and asked me why I never wanted to come over anymore, and accused me of being a mean girl. She talked to me in a way that seemed harmless, therefore wasn't obvious to my mom or my teacher. I kept my mouth shut and didn't say a word. Well, until 2 weeks later. My older sister was babysitting me while our parents were at the movies, and I broke down and told her what had happened because I couldn't stop thinking about it. She comforted me and told my parents. We hugged each other and we cried. A couple weeks later, Janie stopped coming to my school. My classmates wondered what happened, and so did I. I didn't want to ask my parents what happened. 15 years later, I heard from Janie on Facebook. There was no life-changing conversation, but we exchanged pleasantries. That's life sometimes. So crazy, alcoholic, abusive mother. Let's never meet again. This happened a couple years back to a friend and I. We were about 14 then. I was sleeping over at my friend's house, and we were watching a movie in the living area. We lived in a nice area where there was almost no crime, and she lived in a small neighborhood almost no one passed through. We always kept the doors locked though, just in case. About midway through the movie, we heard a car pull up near the house. We didn't think much of it because her father was at work and we thought he came home. We were wrong. Someone started knocking on the door. Her father had a key, so it couldn't have been him. I told my friend Cameron I was going to look through the peephole. I looked out and saw a man about mid-40s standing at the door. He was dirty looking and scratching his head, arms and chest. I thought that he must be on some type of drugs because he had wild eyes. I walked back to the couch where Cameron was and I sat with her. I thought the guy had left because there was no sound outside. Just after I thought everything was fine, the door handle started to shake. The man was trying to get inside the house. Mine and my friend's eyes widened in fear. I told her to turn off the TV and go behind the couch just in case there was anywhere he could see through.
I want in.
Was the line that got my heart racing extremely fast. At this point, he was banging on the door.
I want in.
He kept yelling. Clearly, this man would not give up on trying to get into the house. Cameron was pretty much on the verge of tears, and I couldn't breathe. Luckily, Cameron's father had come home, and the car coming in scared the guy off. We ran to her dad and told him what had happened, and he called the cops, even though there was not much they could do. I stayed the rest of the night, but in the morning, when I went home, I told my mom and told her the cops were called. My friend was horrified to be at her house alone for a while, so she slept over at my house every night. We never saw that man around anymore, which is why I was thankful. That had to be one of the most horrifying moments I had ever experienced. Some crazy crackhead tried to break into my friend's house while we were having a sleepover.